students, I hope you're all doing well and that you are fine and safe at home during this very harsh period of the lockdown. Before we start, let me introduce myself. I'm Dunya Marar, a teacher of English, and I'm working in Casablanca. Today, as you can see on the screen, we will have a quiz of 2 units of your textbook Outlook, and these units are 6 and 7, that is to say, health and hobbies. Actually, the target level is the Common Core students, so let's start. So we will start with the quiz questions. Before we start, I'd like just to tell you that we have 6 questions, and they are varied from questions that are related to grammar, vocabulary, function, and so on and so forth. So we try to make a kind of a good mixture in order to help you revise at home while following us through distant learning. So let's start with the first question, which is related to function. Here you have to match the sentences that are on the left with what they express on the right. And you have 4 expressions or 4 statements and 5 functions. So let's read the statements first. Number 1 says, I have a painful stomach ache. What should I do? Number 2, you look pale. What's wrong? 3, I can't stand Turkish series. Why? Because they are very long actually. 3 or 4, I prefer fish to meat. Now let's have a look at the functions that you're supposed to use. You already have here 5. You will be using only 4, and 1 will not be used at all. Alright, so the functions are expressing preference, expressing dislike, giving opinion, asking about health, and the last one, asking for advice. Now, let's move on to the second exercise, which is as follows. Put the following words in the appropriate heading, and this one is related to vocabulary. Here, as you can see, you have a chart that is divided to 3 columns. In the first one, you have doctors. In the second one, you have medicine. And the last one, you have health problems. The words that you are supposed to fill in the chart with are syrup, dentist, nutritionist, toothache, backache, bandage, plaster, cardiologist, flu, broken arm, painkiller, and ophthalmologist. So, before putting each of these words in the appropriate column, try to grasp what does it mean, and at the same time review what you've done, be it at school, in your classrooms, or via learning online. Now, let's move on to the third question, and it's as follows. Rewrite the sentences without changing the meaning, and here you have to use the 3 modal verbs, and they are must, mustn't, don't have to. So, the first question says, or the first sentence is, it's forbidden to bring sandwiches to hospital. So here you have to paraphrase this sentence using some words having the same meaning and at the same time using one of the 3 modal verbs that you have above. The second sentence says, Sandra needn't learn English in a language school. Why? Because she speaks English fluently. The same thing, rewrite the sentence or paraphrase the sentence without changing the meaning and using a modal verb. Number 3, electronic devices aren't allowed in the doctor's office. Number 4, it's necessary for Patty to take a painkiller. She has a terrible headache. So, concentrate well and focus on the meaning of each of these sentences before using or choosing the appropriate modal verb, and then paraphrase or rewrite your sentences. Okay? Now, let's move on to the fourth exercise, which says, fill in the blanks with the right reflexive pronouns. The first sentence is, Tom only thinks of Gab. You have to use a reflexive pronoun. 3 or 2, I've hurt with a knife gap, and you have to use a reflexive pronoun as well. And 3, Mary went to the mall by, because her friends were busy. And 4, the door opened by, and you have to use the appropriate reflexive pronoun. And the 5th one, we conducted or did, because conduct, we can say conduct a research or do a research. So we conducted the research. And the last one, students must rely on gap in tests. So you have to focus very well and concentrate and try to look for the subject so that it will give you a hint about which reflexive pronoun you're supposed to use. Good. Now, let's move on to the 5th exercise, which is as follows. Put in was, wasn't, were, weren't, and of course here we are talking about the verb to be in the simple past. So here, as you can see, we have a conversation between 2 friends. They are apparently named Tom and Jim. So Tom asks, gap, your parents at home last night? We have L-A-S-T. A T is missing. No, Jim, no, they, gap. Tom, where, gap, they. Jim, they were at the theater. Tom, gap, you with them. No, I, gap, I with my brother in the party. And Tom asked again, whose party, gap, it? His friend answered, it's, gap, Carol's birthday party, and all our friends, gap, there, and it's, gap, a big fun. So here you have to focus on the subject so that you can understand whether you are, so that you can make up your mind whether you will use was or were. And you have also to concentrate on the type of the sentence, whether it's affirmative, negative, or interrogative, so that you would choose the appropriate form of the verb to be in the past, be it was, wasn't, were, or weren't. Alright, take some few minutes to do the exercise, and we will of course correct. Now let's move on to the 6th and the last exercise in our quiz today, which says put the words in the correct order to make correct sentences. So as you can see here, we've got 3 examples and 3 sentences. The words of these sentences are scrambled. This means that they are not in the right order. You have just to make them, put them together and to put them in the right order in order to come up with a correct, meaningful sentence. Okay? So, in the first sentence we have writes, the, of, doctor, prescription, medicine, and a. In the second one, tomorrow, you, free, morning, and you. So you, it's repeated. You will be using you just once. Okay? And 3, handball, play, time, my, 3, I, the subject pronoun I, and him. Okay? Take a few minutes before we start doing our correction, and then we will correct together. Alright, now let's get corrected. We will start our correction of the first exercise, which is match the sentences on the left with what they express on the right. As I've said before, here you've got 5 functions and you will be using only 4 because you have only 4 expressions or 4 statements. So the first one says, I have a painful stomach ache. What should I do? Here, this person is asking for advice. And how do we know that he is asking for advice? It's because we have the expression, what should I do? Of course, you can use, what do I have to do? Can you give me some advice? Can you advise me? What do you advise me to do? And so on and so forth. 2, you look pale, meaning you look sick. What's wrong? Of course, this person is asking about health. Why? Because we have the expression what's wrong, like what's the matter with you, are you okay, and so on and so forth. Alright? And number 3, here you have, I can't stand Turkish series, and actually I can't stand them either because they are very boring and long. Here this person is expressing, this person is expressing dislike, which means, and how do we know that it's dislike? Because we have the expression I can't stand, which means I don't dare, I don't like, I abhor, I hate, and so on and so forth. And number 4, I prefer fish to meat. Here this person is expressing preference because he used the verb I prefer. Now, let's move on to correcting the second exercise of vocabulary. As I've said before, here you've got 3 columns. In the first column in the chart, you have to talk about doctors. The second one, medicine, and the last one, health problems. So, the doctors that we have in the list are a dentist, a cardiologist, and of course a cardiologist is the doctor who takes care of you and treats you when you have some heart problems. Nutritionist, you go to the nutritionist if you have some problems with nutrition or weight, if you are kind of fat, gaining some kilos, and so on and so forth. And an ophthalmologist is the doctor who treats any problems of eyes. Alright? The medicine that we will be using according to the list is syrup, something that's, the kind of medicine that children prefer the most. When it comes to pills, they would go for syrup because it's easy to swallow for them. The second one, bandage. The third one, plaster, and of course here you use a plaster when you have a broken arm or a broken leg. So you use a plaster, alright? And a painkiller, and here of course we are talking about something like aspirin, the ones that we are using here in Morocco, like Doliprane, Surgam, and so on and so forth. And the last column, we have the health problems that are mentioned or that are listed in our list, and they are toothache, backache, broken arm, and a flu or cold. Alright? Now let's correct the second exercise, and here you are supposed to use modal verbs and rewrite the sentences without changing the meaning. Before we do that, let me just remind you that must is used in order to express obligation, something which is compulsory. Mustn't is used in order to express prohibition, something which is forbidden. And don't have to, it expresses no necessity, no obligation, something that you needn't do. And of course, these modal verbs are all followed by the verb in the infinitive. Just for don't have to, subject pronouns that go with don't have to are I, you, we, they. And for the third person singular, he, she, and it, you use doesn't have to. So, let's correct. Number 1, it's forbidden to bring sandwiches to hospital. As you can see here, the hint that has helped us to put mustn't is it's forbidden. When we talk about something which is forbidden or prohibited, we use mustn't. That's why we said here, you mustn't bring sandwiches to hospital. Number 2, Sandra needn't learn English in a language school. Why? Because she speaks English fluently. Here, the answer is Sandra doesn't have to learn English in a language school because she speaks English fluently. And of course, the hint that has helped us here is needn't. Number 3, electronic devices aren't allowed in the doctor's office. Of course, the right answer is people mustn't use electronic devices in the doctor's office. Our hint, our clue here is aren't allowed, which means that it's prohibited, it's forbidden. And the last one says, it's necessary for Katie to take a painkiller. Why? Because she has a terrible headache. So here, Katie must take a painkiller because she has a terrible headache. Why? Because we have the expression, it's necessary. That helps us understand that we are talking about something which is a must, something which is obligatory or compulsory. Clear? Good. Now, let's move on to correcting the fourth exercise, which is about reflexive pronouns. And here you have to fill in the blanks with the right reflexive pronouns. But before, let's try to have a little review of reflexive pronouns. Reflexive pronouns, you use them when you want to emphasize or insist on the doer of the action. For example, Tom only thinks of himself. So as you notice here, what is the subject in our sentence? It's Tom. So himself refers to Tom, who is the doer of the action. Clear? Good. Now, let's move on to the second one. I've hurt myself with a knife. Here the subject is I, so myself refers to the subject, which is I. Mary went to the mall by herself because her friends were busy. Here the subject is Mary, and she went to the mall by herself. Of course, herself refers to Mary, and Mary is a female subject, or she. And number 4, the door opened by itself. Here we are talking about the door, which is the subject, and at the same time it's an object. That's why we use itself. Okay? Good. Now, let's move on to the 5th one. We ourselves conducted the project or the research. Here the subject is we, and ourselves is the reflexive pronoun which refers to we. And 6, students must rely on themselves in tests. This means that they mustn't cheat at all. Here our subject is students, which is the plural subject or they, and themselves refers to students. Clear? Just another reminder, you have to make the difference between the singular reflexive pronouns and the plural ones, because as you've noticed, the singular reflexive pronouns end up with F, like himself, herself, myself, itself, whereas the plural ones end with VES. That is to say, we omit the F and we substitute it by VES, like in ourselves and themselves. Clear? Great. Let's move on to correcting the 5th question. And here, of course, we will be in charge of using the verb to be in the simple past in the appropriate place. Before we start, let's have a little recap of the simple past of the verb to be. Of course, the subject pronouns, here we will be using was or were. Subject pronouns that go with was are I, he, she, and it. And subject pronouns which go with were are you, we, and they. If you want to come up with a negative form, you are supposed to use wasn't. But if you want to come up with an interrogative form, you just invert. That is to say, you start by was, followed by the subject, followed by, the end of the sentence, and then you finish your sentence or you end your sentence by a question mark. So, let's have a look at the dialogue. This dialogue is, as I said before, between two friends who are talking about last night and what happened last night. Okay? So, Tom asked, were your parents at home last night? So, as you've noticed here, we used were because we have parents, and parents is a plural subject. Here, this sentence is already interrogative because we have a question mark. That's why we used were your parents at home last night. So, we start by were, which is the verb to be in the simple past, plus subject, and then you finish your sentence. His friend answered, no. So here the sentence is already negative. Why? Because we have no. No, they weren't, which means that the sentence is already negative. And you have just to make sure that you differentiate between the long form and the short form. The long form of weren't is were not. And what is the rule is that you omit the vowel of not, which is O, and you substitute it by an apostrophe in order to come up with words. The same thing for wasn't, as we will see in the upcoming examples. Alright? So, he said, no, they weren't. Tom answered, and where, or asked again, and where were they? So here he is asking again. His friend answered, they were at the theater. He asked him another question, were you with them? That is to say, were you with them at the theater? Tim answered or replied, No, I wasn't. So here we have a negative sentence, and wasn't is a short form of was not, and we omitted the vowel of not, which is O, and we substituted by an apostrophe like wasn't. No, I wasn't, because I have a negative sentence, and we finished the first sentence in order to move on to the second one. I was with my brother in the party. Tom asked again, whose party was it? Here we are asking another question. The subject is it, so that's why, and we are talking about party, so we have to use was, not were, because party, it's singular, one party, that's why I have to say the party was, not the party were. But if I have parties, in this case I have to use were, alright? So we are talking about one party, so whose party was it? Okay, Jim answered it was Carol's party. All our friends were there. Here we used were because we have friends, and friends is a plural subject because we have S. And it was a big fun. Fun is already singular, so we use was, and also because we have the subject pronoun it, so that's why we would opt for using was and of course not were, because grammatically speaking it's not correct. I hope it was clear. Now let's move on to correcting the last exercise, and here you have to put the words in the correct order in order to make correct sentences. As you can see here, we have scrambled sentences that are made up of scrambled words. You have to put them in the correct order and then come up with the correct and complete and also meaningful sentences. So, number one, we have writes the of doctor, prescription, medicine, and a. The right answer is the doctor writes a prescription of medicine. 2. Tomorrow, you, free, morning, and you, as I've told you before, you will be using you just once. Are you free tomorrow morning? Which is a question. And why? That's why we invert. We put the verb to be at the very beginning because the verb to be doesn't need an auxiliary at all. So that's why you put are, the verb to be, plus subject, and you finish your sentence. And the last one, handball, play, time, my, free, subject pronoun I and in my free time, I play handball. Okay, so I hope it was clear, and I hope that you are doing your best in order to follow with us via e-learning. I hope to meet you all soon in a very good health. Stay safe, stay home. Goodbye.